Now, without any further delay, I would like to turn today's program over to Neil Tolbert. Neil, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and welcome everyone to Possible Now's webinar on solutions for mobile compliance. Presenting today will be myself, Neil Tolbert, along with Brad Shore. Brad is the VP of Marketing and Data Solutions for Possible Now. His group manages over 1 billion records of information on consumer and business profiles and helps enterprises drive many of their campaigns across various direct and digital media channels. While not hard at work helping his customers, Brad enjoys cycling in the Atlanta heat while avoiding as many cars as possible and training for triathlons. Again, my name is Neil Tolbert. I'm excited to be presenting with Brad today. I'm a part of the sales team here at Possible Now with a specific focus on helping companies implement technologies to solve complex compliance and business objectives. I'm passionate about helping our customers and enjoy being a trusted partner on an ongoing basis. Outside of the office, I enjoy spending time on the lake with my wife, Haley, and our handful of a black lab, Lola. As we get started, just wanted to reiterate, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please submit them through the chat function, and we will make sure we have as much time as possible at the end to answer those. Again, this webinar is being recorded and will be available through Possible Now's Resource Center within a few weeks. In today's webinar, Brad and I are going to cover a few different things. The first is the TCPA, how it was amended, and what the impacts were around those amendments. Second, we're going to talk about what companies must do to comply with those regulations, specifically how Possible Now can help with that, and ultimately answer as many questions of yours that we can. So a couple years ago, the FCC amended the Telephone Consumer Protection Act to add a number of different things, but most importantly, it now requires express written consent to market to a cell phone. That includes text messages, calls, and pre-recorded messages, and probably the most dangerous new addition to this regulation is that it opened up private right of action, which is those class actions that everyone's been reading about. And that's why this matters now more than ever. Class actions and TCPA lawsuits have gone up drastically since the law came into effect, and now countless law practices are actually aggressively pursuing class members. This is a problem for almost every industry, and when you look at the enforcements and the fines that some of these organizations are paying, it can be a very real problem for you. With these class actions and lawsuits, the three most common issues are calls and text messages to cell phones, lack of evidence around any prior gained express written consent, and wrong party contacts. So in order for companies to stay out of the headlines, to avoid being a target, they really need to do three specific things. The first, and this may sound fundamental, but a lot of companies are struggling with it, is to identify wireless numbers within your customers and prospects, whether that's an internal database or a CRM, level set on which numbers are wireless and which numbers are landlines so that you can treat them appropriately. The second is to begin collecting express written consent for communications out to those numbers. With the proliferation of mobile-only households and the benefit of consumers always having their cell phones on them, it's not an option for you to not contact these cell phones anymore. And so gaining that consent will allow you to keep them within your marketable universe and realize the efficiencies of all the technologies at your disposal. Finally, you need to implement a routine process for ensuring the accuracy of that database. The consent is only valuable to you as long as it still belongs to the individual who gave it. And with the churn within the wireless phone records, it's too risky to just let your database sit and not ensure you're contacting the right party on an ongoing basis. So that's the problem. That's what we believe companies need to start doing in order to comply, and we're here to help. When we looked at the attendee list for this webinar, we were happy to see a lot of familiar faces. And as most of you know, the solution we're talking about is exactly what Possible Now has focused on for the last 15 years. Headquartered in Atlanta, Possible Now is the gold standard for enterprise preference management and direct marketing compliance. This includes technology, professional services, and data services that are delivered to hundreds of companies around the world. We're proud to say that our compliance expertise and best-of-breed solutions are also leveraged directly by several of the state and federal regulatory agencies. So how are we going to help? These next several slides, we're going to start to run through the specific solution for each of those three requirements. One, for scrubbing those wireless numbers or identifying those wireless numbers using our high-powered scrubbing solution, which is available via a batch process or real-time, using our consent management tool to collect and manage those express consents so that you can streamline that process and leverage those consents moving forward. And ultimately, using our wireless scoring service to identify a confidence code associated with cell phone ownership. When we look at identifying wireless numbers, our recommendation is to leverage our scrubbing tool to check against all of the relevant wireless filters. Specifically, the ones we're calling out here are the wireless block identifier and the ported number database. This encompasses how a number could be or become wireless and is really considered an industry best practice in this area. The benefits of using our solution versus doing something internally is that we have a fast, reliable, high-speed application that allows you to do these checks, again, in either real-time or via a batch process with complete tracking and auditability around that scrub and our compliance guarantee. Ultimately, the tool was designed to allow you to automate this process so that you can ensure compliance on an ongoing basis, allowing you to focus on what you do best and leaving the compliance up to us. This will be a recurring slide through the next couple of minutes here. And what we put this workflow together for was to demonstrate how someone could utilize these solutions to start to gain and collect express consent through a lead collection form. The scrubbing process specifically is what's circled here in red, and what we recommend from a best practice standpoint is the first thing once a consumer gives you their phone number. You don't need to be collecting this express consent for all of your consumers, only the ones that are providing a wireless device. And so as a part of this process flow, the possible now web service call to identify wireless yes or no is circled here in red. Ultimately, as a part of the scrubbing process, you're able to configure the lists or filters you're checking against. Again, we referenced what we consider to be a best practice, but we also can manage any relevant list you would want to check against, ultimately giving you that high-powered, high-speed processing of those records with an output receipt or audit trail of when was scrubbed and what was scrubbed. And finally, giving you, whether it's in a batch format like this or via a real-time API, a flag that tells you whether or not a number is wireless. Next, in this process, once you know if a number is wireless, is to collect that express written consent. This creates a lot of complexity for organizations when they consider how they're going to manage and track this data moving forward. So we advocate that you use our consent management tool that allows you to collect this consent in every consumer touch point you're using. So we believe that every time you interact with your consumer is a great opportunity for you to ask how they want to hear from you, and collecting that consent is certainly a key part of that. Also allows you to leverage best practices that Possible Now's helped to pioneer in terms of how you drive this adoption, whether it's from an interface perspective or how you deploy this throughout your agent networks for collecting that express consent over the phone. It gives you the management tools, the data management tools to keep track of these preferences, manage this conversation over your customer's lifecycle, and ultimately give you all of the auditability and trackability so that you can ensure compliance moving forward. Getting back to the workflow diagram, once you identified whether or not a number is wireless, and you then display the appropriate disclosure language, which can be managed within our application, you're able to collect that affirmative express consent and store that for historical and compliance purposes. One of the biggest problems with this regulation is that in most cases, the defendants are guilty until proven innocent. And so having a robust application that can prove all of the information around when you collected a consent and show that consent conversation over the lifetime of your interaction with that consumer is paramount to you ensuring compliance with these regulations. Here's an example of how you can help manage that disclosure language that you're displaying in this process through our application, which is all configurable, and we will have an audit trail of the different versions of this language as it changes over time. Here's another example of how you would help manage those different filters. So when you consider how you keep track of these consents, whether it's an overarching one or a consent by specific brand or product line, you're able to keep track of that separately, again, with full audit trails so that you can manage compliance moving forward. Finally, the application is designed to give the marketers on the call and the operations folks on the call all of the transparently and reporting capabilities to keep track of your consent and preference projects moving forward. We understand that this is paramount from a compliance standpoint, but also provides a lot of value to your organizations in terms of how you communicate with your customers more effectively. And so being able to prove that, being able to show reporting over time is fundamental when you consider a solution of this kind. The next component is going to be our wireless scoring piece, and I will pass it over to Brad to discuss that.
Thank you, Neil. So once you've actually obtained permission to contact the consumer via their cell phone, there is continued risk in the management of that data in that you don't know if that original customer is still associated with that cell phone number over time, or have they left that carrier or dropped that phone line and someone else has picked that up, so that when you do call, it's someone else on the line versus the original person that you thought was there. And that was the origination of our mobile scoring service, which we use to help determine the likelihood that a person is still associated with that cell phone and assigns a confidence score. And then based on those scores that we've assigned, your business rules can determine if it is high enough for you to make those phone calls. Your calling database can be scrubbed using the scoring process in a batch or API mode to keep it updated and scored. The obvious benefits to this is reduced risk of significant fines or lawsuits, as well as showing a good faith effort that is auditable and trackable that you were attempting to verify the right party contact. This is sort of the flow of how we do the mobile scoring process. We actually will take the input record from your firm, again, individually or as a batch file, run it up against a variety of databases. This is how we have configured the processing flow and the scores that we've assigned based on our best practices that we use. It certainly can be reconfigured if you wish it to go through additional hits or processes as well. And we eventually will assign scores to each number that is submitted to us. This is an example of what the output may look like with the score on the right side. We have various customers that are using their business logic to determine which scores they will decide to call and the frequency that they determine to rerun each of their customer databases. As a side note, there is a roughly 25 to 30% churn in the wireless database every year. There is no definitive database that can be licensed directly from the carriers. Although there are some, the data sets that we access do create a high degree of accuracy and opportunity for that. One of the challenges that we do face is when we do make live network queries into the telephone network, Verizon Wireless does not actually participate in that, and so I can tell which phone numbers are at least Verizon Wireless, but they do not return a phone number or a name associated with that. And also, family plans also create challenges, as you may have 5 or more individuals associated with a family all under one name. And so that's essentially what it is, and we've got a lot of successful runs that we've done for many customers. We would like to offer up to everyone on the phone that we will offer to do this processing for up to 10,000 records for free, so you can see what those scores may look like, how the process may work, and I've provided all that we need from you to start that process for you. So you can contact us via the email address that's provided. and we'll contact you, make sure we understand your requirements, and then process the file for you. And that's it.
Thanks, Brad. So if anyone has any questions, please feel free to submit them through the chat function. If we don't get to them today, or you think of one after this webinar, please feel free to also email mobilescoring@possiblenow.com, and we will be happy to answer those. We've got 3 questions here. I believe a couple of them we could probably just expand a little bit further on. And the first one are we able to configure the criteria for the scoring process?
Yes, we've established a process that in our mind is how we think we'll get the best score and the best results to determine if that's the right party contact. If a company would like to tweak that, we certainly can do that specifically for that customer.
Great. And can you walk through, I know we provided the workflow a few slides ago, can you walk through specifically what happens when someone provides you a phone number, how you step through that scoring process to assign the confidence code?
Yes, the individual databases that we hit, we do a variety of checks to landline databases. We also will hit a mobile database that we've actually compiled and have scored ourselves, and then we also will leverage the ability to inquire against the telephone company's own data sets for those that make that available. And that's where the gap of the Verizon Wireless exists, but we do and are able to return a significant amount of information to confirm names with AT&T, Sprint, T-Mobile as some of the bigger ones.
Great. Thanks, Brad. Glad to see all the questions coming in. So one question here, can we accept a PDF that contains the consent language that is different for each phone number? So we can absolutely maintain a record of consent that's captured outside of our application. That would require certain document management tools or at least policies in order to retain that consent for the period of time you would need to comply with the law, but we could absolutely manage that consent if it's captured within a physical document or somewhere outside of our application. The next question is, are there established business relationship or EBR exemptions for the TCPA rules? Unfortunately, no. That was one of the distinctions that this amendment made, was that there is no exemption in terms of whether or not someone is a customer, and if you have to have that express written consent, which is different than a lot of the compliance-related regulations we're used to here in the U.S. Have seen this question a couple times. We will be making the webinar available within our resource center. It does usually take a couple weeks to get it there, but we will be making that available as soon as possible. So, Brad, one other question here, and I know you mentioned that this service was available via our web service. Can you explain a little bit more about how someone would implement this in a real-time process?
Sure. We actually have an API that would hit our scoring process, so if anyone wanted to do this real-time, we would provide them our API, make sure that our business logic that we've devised for the scoring is acceptable to them, or make whatever changes they are interested in specifically for an API for them, and then they would connect to that API and submit phone numbers through that as they collect it, whether it's from lead forms or any other mechanism of collection.
Excellent. And so one other question here, and this is a great question. In your experience, Brad, where do you see, from a level of risk and when it's considered safe to call a number, what score do you typically see our customers dialing at when you get those results back?
Usually we see that at the B level based on the amount of data that we collect to get to that point, and that's usually where we have matched already phone numbers to and names to other consumer databases that we have that confirm address, as an example, that they're still at that address. We will match them to the mobile database that we have confirmed. And then the A's typically are where I'm even getting a match at the telephony level where I inquire against the network and it returns back that that name, or at least the surname, is correct for that phone number.
Excellent. So another question here, and this is a very good point. When we look at collecting this express consent, we obviously showed examples of how you would do that through a My Account page or within a preference center. But one of the most successful channels for gaining this consent is actually within your call centers when you have someone on the phone, whether it's a customer service representative or an agent, and having them actually ask for that consent, which is perfectly acceptable. There are requirements around how you record when that consent is given, but we can absolutely store that and are happy to discuss how we've deployed that within some other customers of ours. So one question here, and this is a great point. Any of the solutions that we showed today are not all-encompassing or are not all-inclusive of each other. So we absolutely have customers that leverage our wireless scrubbing or our consent tools that don't use the wireless scoring, but vice versa, we also have several customers that are leveraging our wireless scoring process that don't use the consent tools. So we're absolutely happy to talk about what a solution looks like for you outside of those separate processes.
There's a question here of, is Google Voice number considered a wireless number? And that's actually a tricky one. The number itself is not considered a wireless number. The problem is that many folks sign up for Google Voice and have that number forward to their cell phone. And so I can't identify if that's in place, if there's forwarding in place, and it may still reach the cell phone. A little bit of a gray area in how the law applies to auto forwards that the consumer set up. And I don't know if that's made it into the case law at all at this point. But Google Voice in itself is not considered wireless, but it does. You should exhibit caution if you know that it is a Google Voice number because it could have an auto forward on it.
And here's another great question about about gaining express consent and whether or not that actually has to be in writing. As long as you meet the requirements of the e-Sign Act, you can gain express written consent electronically or over the phone. That is where call recording or very, very good archiving of the disclosure language and the preference conversation or the consent conversation is crucial. So yes, it's a great point, but all of these interactions where you're trying to gain this express written consent must meet the e-sign requirements. So it looks like that may be the end of the questions. If anyone else has any more, please feel free to send them to mobilescoring@possiblenow.com. And we will get back to you as quickly as possible. We certainly appreciate you taking the time today. Hope you found it informative, and we look forward to having you on our next webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your questions, and thank you again for joining us. This concludes our program. You may now disconnect.